Hey everyone, this is Zan, and welcome to Dominion 6 at a glance. Today we'll talk about Phaeacia, Isle of the Dark Ships. Phaeacia is inspired from Homer's Odyssey and are a nation of sailing demi-giants. All their commanders can sail if the start and end provinces are in range and have friendly dominion, even if there's unfriendly dominion in between. They have air magic on par with Calum, great item forging, and very versatile magic paths that also have access to communions. To move on to their unit summary, they only have 4 real units on their roster. They have inexpensive human archers, efficient light infantry with spear, javelin, and a very high mat move, efficient heavy infantry, and a very expensive sacred infantry that does come with magical equipment. And the human half of the unit roster is not too impressive, so we'll skip over them and go to the commanders. For the commanders, their priests are kind of weak but can sail, and the rest of the mages have a pretty cool distinction between early and late game commanders. So early game, you might use mage pilots to shuffle around human troops, but mostly you're going to lean on the storm captains, which are very durable because of their equipment. They can sail regardless of dominion, including with giants, and they're all this consistent air 2, water 1 path, which is really good with the magic that you're going to want to be using. Alternatively, you have wind callers, which are less durable but better mages, but take twice as long to recruit. In your capital, you have the Prince Consort as your early game mage because they don't need communions to kick ass with their very high air and water paths. As you transition to the late game, though, you're going to want to lean a lot more on the Colossi Weavers because they have communion potential, a lot of crazy paths, and have a forge bonus. Same thing in your capital, you're going to use the Colossi Queens because, again, they're communion capable and have a lot of useful paths, mainly the air glamour cross path. That doesn't mean that you won't use Colossi Storm Captains for leading units, raiding, or just their consistent magic, though. Phaeacia does get access to a lot of the Greek summons, but then they also get some unique ones for themselves. So their important one is going to be the Hesperide, which is a lot harder to get now in Dominion 6, but totally worth it. The combat summon of the Sparte, this is with Earth magic, and these are very, very good alternative to Earth Elementals, especially when it comes to raiding. The Kalkataros is extremely expensive, but also very, very strong, and I'm going to be testing these out in multiplayer games soon. And then the non-national summons, there's kind of 2 of them, and they're both fairly defensive. The first is going to be the Telastic Animate, which is essentially just a preacher, and you're going to use these to maintain dominion over some of your colonies to make sure that you are able to sail to them with your entire army, not just your native sailing mages. And the Watchers are kind of for the same purpose. I don't really like these too much on your colony forts, as in the forts that are not connected to your capital. But I do like these on your capital, especially if you have some sort of static defense patrolling it at all times in case, an underwater player wants to get uppity. All that said, we move on to a combined roster, and what I see in this roster is going to be a very mobile and defensive unit line with a very mobile and destructive mage core. Air magic in general is extremely offensive, but now in Dominion 6 that they have misform buffs and earlier Aerofen buffs, I feel like they can also protect your units, at least against non-magical weapons. So ideally, you want to combine the roster to leverage your sailing and high mat move to hit unexpected places to defend far-flung outposts. Ideally, you want to be building your cities on the coasts because you get more income, which is going to let you sail to them at a moment's notice. And essentially, you're going to be able to have a lot more of your army in a specific battle than your enemy might, just because in a perfect world, a lot of your provinces are reachable within 1 or 2 turns from your entire army, which is crazy. As the game progresses, you're going to want to start forging a lot of really good gear. You're going to want to start using communions with the Colossi Weavers, and that's especially why the Dominion and sailing effect is kind of important because these Weavers can't sail. Early on, it doesn't matter too much because primarily you're going to be using these storm captains to buff your troops with misform or do lightning invocations, and they can sail on their own with all of your giants. So early on it's okay, but later on you definitely want to have the Dominion effect secured. Your capital-only leaders also need that sailing effect. And again, your Prince Consort can kind of do it all early on with the Thunderstrikes, the Fog Warriors, and all that. But later on, you might want to include Glamour to cast some of the crazier spells that we're going to talk about soon. Talking about the spells for the nation, most of it's going to lean heavily on air magic, as that's your most readily available and consistent magic. We're going to start with Mistform and the better spells of it, just because I feel that currently it's a very strong protective buff for your units. Magic weapons don't seem too common yet, at least in blesses, so painting Mistform on some of your defensive units is going to go a long way. Thunderstrike is very iconic, and although you might need Storm and Storm Power, which are also listed here, to bump up your air magic to cast it easily, I still think it's worth, even on an Air 2 mage, giving them a single air gem and doing a Thunderstrike on turn 1, because your opponent is likely still in a very close formation doing buffs of their own, and that is when Thunderstrike is the best, when the enemy is not moving and when they're huddled up together. Frozen Heart is readily available on a lot of the mages here, and is very underlooked when a player is looking to fight you, because most players don't tend to have a lot of cold resistance. And even if you have like 5 cold resistance, Frozen Heart might still do a lot of armor negating damage. Cloud of Slumber and Wailing Winds are new additions to Phaeacia, with the Air Glamour path being very, very strong now as a result. Sleep Clouds are crazy powerful, and although your units have better magic resistance than normal and you can give them anti-magic, they're probably still going to fall asleep. Thankfully, the job of most of your unit roster is to keep things away from your mages, and your mages will kill things, and your mages ideally are not inside the Cloud of Slumber. Wailing Winds puts the entire battle on a timer for your enemy, and is, or rather should I say, was one of the most oppressive spells in Dominions 5. So having that now on this nation is crazy. Thunder Ward is just there to prevent your mages from casting non-lightning evocation spells because they are worried about friendly fire. So it's more of an AI casting thing than an actually good spell thing, but it's a good trick to note. Same thing for group Stone Skin. You want to avoid group Iron Skin because that's going to give you lightning resistance, and your mages might not cast as many lightning evocations as a result. So although the group Stone Skin and Iron Skin spells are hard to cast without a communion, they're still really, really strong, and this is just a preference. Now, on the strategic map, Cloud Trapeze and Seeking Arrow are both very strong. Cloud Trapeze for enabling you to have Magic Phase movement and Magic Phase raiders with the Storm Captain, for example. And then Seeking Arrow, well, all of your Prince Consorts can cast this natively, and a lot of Seeking Arrow spam can go a long way in debilitating an opponent. It's not listed here, but definitely an honorable mention for Air Elementals, which have been nerfed a lot in Dominion 6, but remain pretty damn strong. Not as oppressive as they were in Dominions 5, but it is almost never a bad idea to start summoning some Air Elementals in combat. For the Titan of Phaeacia, I don't think you're going to need an expander, because although their first few turns can be rough, I feel like they catch up as the game progresses. So you might want to go for something dormant or even something greedy like an imprisoned. Their sacreds are very strong as is, and they don't need much, but they wouldn't mind some extra resistances or stats. And so here's kind of like a simple scales-ish bless for them. But to give you other examples of what you could do, you could take a minor bless and a titan, like the Bronze Colossus, which is probably one of the stronger titans in the game. And you'll notice it has weaker paths than usual, but still leverages the high production, growth, and magic that the nation can do. So that's pretty cool for such a strong chassis. Alternatively, if you want to go full greed and get Dominion's 5 scales, where you have 3 order, 3 production, and 3 magic, you can do something like this, and this is still going to give you a decent bless for the late game for some of your sacred mages and your sacred infantry. And that can be cool. Alternatively, if you want a pretender who will protect your island capital from the big bad underwater player, I'm personally not too worried about something like that happening, but if you are, you can take something like this. I had a few Dominions 5 veterans and even Lucid Tournament finalists try their hand, and they had a pretty hard time at taking this thing out, so it'll do a good job of defending your capital. Just remember to patrol. Moving on to the gameplay of Phaeacia, I feel like as you expand, you're going to want to prioritize some high income coastal provinces because we're going to want to fort these and leverage that you do get a income bonus on coastal forts. Keep in mind as you play that to sail with your giant infantry, you also need a giant sailor like the Storm Captain. The little human at the beginning can't do it on his own. Sailing distance is something that is determined at map generation and tends to be 2 provinces across. And don't think of sailing as physically moving your units from one fort to another. It kind of functions more like a teleport mechanic. And if you think of it that way, it's going to be a lot easier mechanically to use. Onto the infantry themselves, your Colossi Light Infantry are very good at expansion and early wars because of the accurate and damaging javelin. But as the game progresses, you might want to transition more into the Colossi Heavy Infantry because they have the same gold cost and just cost more resources. Early game 2, you want to prioritize your Prince Consorts over your Colossi Queens because the Consort does not need a communion to function effectively. They are strong as hell, as is. Now, in the mid-game, you've completed, hopefully, the transition to heavy infantry. You can maybe start getting some Colossi Queens. Site search as best as you can, because your gem economy is going to be your lifeline later on. You don't have particularly high sorcery paths, and you don't have blood magic. But what you do have is very good forging with the Colossi Weaver that has a myriad of paths and a forge bonus. You want to use Storm and Thunderstrikes to leverage a lot of your air magic, especially turn 1 and 2 of combat. And keep in mind that through the power of sailing or even things like Cloud Trapeze, you can bring a lot of units with the Colossi Storm Captain that maybe your opponent wasn't expecting you to bring. Just remember that air magic is going to be your bread and butter. As you finally get into the late game, you almost always just want to make Colossi Queens because they're going to join communions with your Colossi Weavers. These communions are pretty durable and they have access to a lot of magic paths, especially Glamour, which is going to be very strong later, and Astral. You can always include your Prince Consorts with auto communion items. Now, the only problem in the late game is that you're definitely going to want to find a way to include nature and earth into your communions because they have very powerful spells that are almost going to be essential as the game progresses. Otherwise, you might die to poison or something, you know? But mostly the late game is going to be you leveraging your high mobility and your strong communions to defeat your enemies, especially using spells like Wailing Winds or Wrathful Skies, and so on. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the Phaeacia at a glance video. I hope it's inspired you to give them a shot in a multiplayer game. They're particularly close to my heart just because although they are a nation of demi-giants, they all have very high mat move, very high mobility, they got sailing. So overall, it's just such a great package that I love playing them with. They're great in single player, they're great in multiplayer. And personally, I think that they lend themselves well to using some sort of Titan, which we all know I love. So it's just a great nation to play. So if you haven't already, please do me a favor, give me a like, give me a subscribe on the video. It lets me know that these are the kind of things that you want me to be doing. And I hope you didn't miss the lack of battle during the gameplay too much. I'm going to have a bit of a real life grind this week and next week. So there won't be an at-a-glance video for just a little bit, but I will try to release some early age Makone multiplayer gameplay videos. It's supposed to be a very high skill lobby, and it's been pretty fun so far, so I hope you guys enjoy that too. So, see you guys next time.